Hello again. As you can see, I have my um, a different virtual background since well, we've gotten through most of the talks already. We have one more, which is in room one, me getting published in ELT. In room two, Mason Blandford is talking about modal verbs. Then we will lead into our closing plenary with Holly, who is actually here in the room with us right now. And then the day will be yours again. So very nice to see some uh, known people. As Kenneth, nice to see you. I haven't seen you since Torren.
Yeah, nice to see you. Yep.
Catherine not joining us today, or is she hiding somewhere on a different name?
I've no idea. I think she was going to come, so yeah.
Ah, it's a Saturday. It's difficult to get people to do things on a Saturday. Estelle, you've been here since the beginning. Gosh, you must be exhausted.
No, it's very invigorating.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I hope that it still is by the end of this one. So I'm getting a little bit of screen tiredness in the eyes coming in. So let me share my slides, get ready for that. Need to make sure that I can still see the chat and participants if they're joining still. There we go. Wouldn't say it's a one-man show. Mason's been very helpful running room two. That's the interesting thing about online versus face-to-face discussions, of course, is that when we were in Torren for the wonderful teacher training day recently, the whole of, or pretty much the whole IH Torren school, all the teachers there turned out in kind of a uniform. They all had these yellow polo shirts on, um, so that they could help run the day, getting people to the right rooms and things like that. With online teacher training days like this one, it's possible to do quite a lot just on the screen. Helps to have a big screen. Although one of the downsides of having a big screen is I've got my webcam up just there, and I've got the participant views down the side. And what I noticed during the pandemic when I was talking was that some of the female students in the class would start getting a little bit like, "Oh God, what is Chris looking at? Why is he looking there?" It's because I was looking at the screen where the student was, but my eye line was certainly not going to the webcam. It was going to the student. And yeah, it's something that as presenters we have to get used to, as teachers we have to get used to. Students get used to it as well. It's funny as well how students were a little bit unconscious of what was going on sometimes, and would be clearly checking their phones um, when they should have been paying attention to other things, I suppose. Anyway, let's get on with the show. And today I'm going to talk about a subject that is obviously close to my heart. Many of you know me as a teacher, teacher trainer, director of studies. I am also the editor of the International House Journal. The IH Journal went on a kind of extended hiatus after the last editor. It was kind of forgotten about, but there has been a renewal in interest in the journal and in IH generally. A lot of things have been kind of being renewed, and there has been a brilliant rebrand recently. I don't know if you've noticed, but the IH World website has changed quite significantly. That has now followed through with a refreshed image for the IH Journal. I love it. All of the branding basically for today's teacher training day was in accordance with the brand guidelines laid forth by IH, and they are actually very, very useful. You know, don't use these colors together, use these images, use this kind of color scheme. It's really helped. So anything to get people reading again is great. But one of the things that we can do as teachers to kind of boost our professional development is to think about writing. Now, Stephen did mention this in his talk earlier today, but also about the idea of doing workshops and webinars and things like that. For me, the core issue here is one of expertise. If you are confident enough to teach something, that's great. But if you're going to teach it in a public and recorded manner, like at a teacher training day, or write about something like for the IH Journal, you really have to know your stuff because there are critics out there. Everybody is a critic when it comes to it. So if you only have a half-baked idea, your students might not notice, but readers will. So for professional development, getting published is one of the best ways to really test yourself, to really see if you know what you're talking about, because editors will be the first line of criticism. They will come back and say, are you sure about this? Are you sure about that? And it can really help refine your knowledge. So in today's session, I'm going to take a kind of opposite view or an opposite route through the topic. Normally, when we look at writing articles, we start with the ideas themselves. Then we end with where you can send your work. I'm going to take the opposite route here. So we're going to start by thinking about the editor. And for that, we're going to then look at some example outlets, and I'll be providing links at some stage to the different places that you can send your work so that you can start getting yourself published. But in each case, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own experience of having a piece published by each outlet so that when you start writing and you start thinking about the sort of text you're going to write, you'll be better equipped with the sort of knowledge that you need to deliver something that the editors for these different outlets will want. So I'll be sharing some of the things that I've learnt along the way. Then we'll look a little bit about how to structure an article for publication, taking an example from the IH Journal. And we'll finish the session today by sharing ideas and maybe brainstorming some ELT articles themselves. So at the end of today's session, you'll hopefully go away with an idea that you're ready to develop into an article that you might send to me for publication in the IH Journal or to one of the other outlets that we've discussed. So we're going to look at these 5 places that you might want to send your writing. There are many others, and a quick search on social media will reveal a lot of other places that you can send your writing to. We're going to go for these 5 because these are 5 places where my own writing has been published, and I actually then have stories that I can share about them. So let's start with humanizing language teaching. And hopefully you can still see the screen okay. So this is the landing page for humanizing language teaching, which is put out by Pilgrims. You'll probably recognize a lot of the names here. The editor here is Hania Krzyzewska. She's a very friendly person, not always the quickest to respond to emails, but then I should imagine it's because she gets a lot of them. So if we take a look at, for example, the current edition of Humanizing Language Teaching, they're separated into different sections. The most recent one, like with the most recent issue of the IH Journal, which was devoted in part to the memory of Britta Haycraft, who passed away quite recently. This one opens with a memorial to Mario Rinvolucri, who sadly passed away not too long ago. Then there's a small section on news within ELT. So this is a great place to go to get the latest news about things happening like IATEFL in Poland, which I think will be in Łódź. Contact Rob Howard if you're interested in that. Then they've got articles here on AI. We've got articles on tertiary education, eco issues, 21st century skills, some lesson ideas, and short reviews of some publications. So they cover a lot. Sometimes HLT will have an issue where all of the writers come from one geographical location, which I think is fantastic because you get a completely different perspective of what's going on in English language teaching. Sometimes they'll have a special issue. I haven't found very much information about what those special issues would be ahead of time. If we look at the contributors' guidelines, these things are always very important to look at. And as with pretty much every outlet there is, the Word document is the preferred means by which to send your article. As the editor of the journal, I have received PDFs, and I don't like PDFs because I can't get the text out of them. Even doing a copy paste, it's a lot of work. So if you are submitting anywhere, follow the guidelines. For me, it's not necessarily that important if you use a particular font or if the spacing is the same as whatever they have here, single spaced. I don't mind that sort of thing too much because I put everything into a Google Doc, strip it of any formatting, and I apply the house style anyway. So keep things simple and send them in according to this. Notice that for the guidelines here, there's a lot more about formatting than about the content itself. So it's very open. Um, Hannah has always encouraged people to write from the heart. So if there's a topic that you're interested in, any sort of topic, you could send it here. Okay, so that's humanizing language teaching, hltmag.co.uk. The next one, this is now called Connections, and it was the website of an association of teachers based in Berlin. And I think they've grown, they've expanded a lot. So I wrote an article for them a few years ago, um, which was, if I remember correctly, I think it was about adjective order in English or something like that. And this one gave me a much, much more hands-on experience of having my work edited. And I would say that the editing team here is a little bit more alive to things like SEO, which for those not in the know is search engine optimization. So when I initially sent off my writing to Connections, the response was enthusiastic, which is often the case, and it's nice to hear that as a writer. But they had a lot of edit requests to make my sentences shorter and to avoid the passive voice wherever possible, because short sentences seem to work better in a lot of search engines. And for a lot of outlets like this, they're trying to draw people in from search results. They want you to write texts that will score high in the Google algorithm. So bear that in mind. A lot of their texts are available here, so you can go in, you'll find out a little bit about who they are. The most recent articles that they've published. Not a huge number recently. I mean, looking at this, they've got 3 from this year, so I should imagine they'd be very happy to receive more. They publicize how many views different articles have had. And at the top here, we have their writing guidelines. So here they start more with what they want in terms of the content and the way that it's written rather than formatting. So it's interesting to note these sort of differences. And like I say, they're looking for things that are short sentence based because they think it's better for readability. I agree to an extent. I suppose when I'm reading on a screen, it's not the same as reading on paper. And they don't want terribly long texts. They're looking for something around 800 words or so. One thing to note is that they're looking for things that will inspire ESL teachers. Now, be in bonnet time, I suppose, Estelle. I often wonder about when people use a particular acronym and if they really care about the differences too much. For me, if you're going to be an English language teacher in Germany, that's unlikely to be an ESL setting. For me, ESL would be if you're teaching English in an English speaking context to people whose language is not English. So, for example, when I did a summer school a few years ago in Scotland, that was ESL teaching because as soon as the students left the classroom, they went out into an English speaking community. They could practice their skills there. If you're writing somewhere like in Germany, if you're teaching there or teaching here in Poland, when the lesson ends, the student's exposure to English probably ends. Anyway, that's a tangential point. It's just me saying things. The next one, EFL magazine. This one's been around for a while. It's got some very good articles, some interesting things, and from what I've seen, more of a personal touch, let's say. Some very interesting stuff. For example, Margaret Beck has the lead article here about her own experiences of teaching English in Timor-Leste. Um, that's very far removed from my own experiences. So I like this sort of thing. I love hearing about teachers in far-flung locations, anywhere from outside of Poland is far-flung as far as I'm concerned. Um, so it's very interesting to have a look through and to see what sort of things that they like to have. And then, if I remember correctly, they tell you a little bit at the bottom how to submit. Yep, they've got the contact page here. So this is a big site with lots and lots of articles. They're also big on YouTube. They have lots of videos, and they also have kind of like businessy information things. So they've got, for example, listings of schools for sale. So, it's a big kind of community sort of website. Now, the three that I've talked about so far, before you think about submitting to them, I really recommend that you read as many of their current articles as possible. And that also goes for the IH Journal. It doesn't necessarily go for the next one, which is Modern English Teacher. This used to be two magazines, physical print magazines, and this is a physical print magazine, unlike the others, really. Modern English Teacher used to be also partnered with English Teaching Professional or ETP, but such is the way of business, it kind of shrank and now it's just the one. But it is an excellent resource. I think Stephen Tarbuck has been published here. I've been published a number of times, quite often with articles about Duolingo and what Duolingo means for us. They do have a digital issue, and they have got some kind of free articles, the complimentary articles. So you can read a little bit about what their house style is like, because it's really important to get a feel for what they produce. It is a little bit harder to make sure you're not covering recently trodden ground with Modern English Teacher unless you take out a subscription and you go back through previous issues. Because one thing that editors don't particularly like is an article being submitted to them that is like the mirror image of something they published recently. Because it suggests that you've taken, you've got a text and you're just firing it out there looking for somewhere where it sticks. Most editors like a more personalized approach where you show some awareness of their expectations. So it would be good to at least look through the table of contents of recent issues, look through the complimentary articles. But if you can get yourself published in Modern English Teacher, then you're really in there with the big hitters. I mean, looking at the complimentary article here, this was written by John Hughes, not the film director, as far as I'm aware, because I think he was less into EFL than into things like 16 Candles. But still, John Hughes is a great guy. I reviewed a book of his in Catherine Billsborough's recently. They have their writing guidelines right at the bottom. So you've got the little, is it a colophon? I can't remember what it's called when they have these little things at the bottom. Under Write for Us, first of all, they have like a mission statement saying, don't worry if you're not an L1 speaker. Don't worry if you're not this or that. They want fresh voices as well as things from experienced writers. Um, I would say that they could probably do with updating their general guidance because they're suggesting that we read ETP, English Teaching Professional, to get an idea of what they publish. Well, it's hard to do that now that it's gone. Um, but they have got some very useful things here. Robert McClarty has been the editor at Modern English Teacher for quite some time, so um, he knows what he's doing. I would say that in terms of the editing process, my own experiences suggest, unless I'm a much better writer than I give myself credit for, which is very unlikely, he's very hands off. I never really got responses back from him to say, please change this or change that. It was more that I would send work, and if it was good, it would go in. And if not, I just never heard back. Uh, So they've got guidance for article length, and because it's a print magazine, that kind of changes the flavor a little bit. So you'd be looking at guidance according to the length of the printed article, and the articles here generally tend to be a bit longer than on some of the other web pages that I've talked about so far. Okay, and then that really it brings us to the IH journal, and this is what it looks like now. This is the current issue. Um, we try to have many special features, but it's difficult as an editor to have a call for submissions for a special feature. First of all, I'm not very creative or imaginative, and I struggle to come up with a theme that is interesting enough to make it work as a special feature. But secondly, because a lot of teachers are too busy to really spend time writing, I don't want to make it harder for people to see themselves getting published. So if I say I really want articles on this very specific area, I'm afraid that I just won't get many articles. So I try to keep it general. But it is still worth reading through recent issues to get an idea of what we've covered, what we are likely to cover in the future, and to make sure that you don't repeat what we've had recently. The writing guidance is all here, and I always point people to this web page. Some people think that they can just write and then send it in. You don't have to be an IH teacher to write for the journal. I should make that very clear. Although it is the IH journal, that doesn't mean that it's the IH journal for IH teachers. We always look for fresh voices from people inside, outside the network. It doesn't matter as long as the quality of writing is good. So there is guidance on the length of our articles here, and if you want to include some referencing, we have it here. I edit meticulously because I feel that I should. So if you send something to me and then I put it into a Google Doc and it goes back to you with 60 change suggestions, don't worry about it, that's standard. So I often go really deep into it because I feel that for one thing, going through the editing process is a useful lesson for teachers. You know, we are so often in a position to give feedback to our students. Why should we not have the same for ourselves? There is a lot to learn from it, and I've been through that process, not just for writing for ELT outlets, but writing generally. And I've always appreciated the guidance that somebody else can give if they are a good editor themselves, but also because they have a different perspective on what writing constitutes, what good writing constitutes. One thing that I would make very clear is avoid using AI to generate any of your text, not just for IH and the IH journal, but for any of these outlets, because we're all kind of awake to it. And we all use, or I do, this website, 0GPT. So here you can enter a text, click detect text, and it'll tell you how likely it is that this was generated by an AI engine. Now, unfortunately, it's not perfect because if you have used AI or Google Translate to take your text from one language and put it into another, then you're going to have a problem here. It will say that it is AI generated. So it is possible for there to be false positives. Unlikely that would be a false negative. And on a side note, as a director of studies, I have noticed an increasing tendency for teachers to get their cover letters just right through ChatGPT. Don't. If you're ever applying for a job anywhere, or if you know anybody who is, even if you're not a great writer, write your own cover letters, because a director of studies who knows that a cover letter has been written with the assistance, or maybe not even the assistance, but has been given to an AI engine to write, they're not going to think of the teacher the same way as somebody who tried their best and produced something that was from the heart, but maybe not the most amazing piece of writing. So before sending anything, even if you did it yourself, it is kind of worth putting all of your text into something like Zero GPT, just to see if you've written something so formulaic that it is accidentally marked as plagiarized from AI. I'm sure that won't happen, but it is worth mentioning these things. So those are some different outlets. There are many others, of course. But I wanted to share those first because when we start talking about writing, we need to think about what the audience wants, what the editor wants first, and then the audience after. Kat has written a very good question, which is the person paid for publishing? This is an interesting question, actually, because when I started out as the journal editor, one of the most curious emails I got was from a writer who said, "Oh, I think I have to withdraw my article because I just received a request for money." Because a lot of academic outlets, the referenced and peer-reviewed journals charge an absolute fortune for you to get published. I mean, we're talking here up to thousands of dollars. Ivona knows what I'm talking about. A lot of journals are like that. They expect their contributors to pay their way. The places that I've shown you so far, Modern English Teacher pays, and it's, I think, 65 British pounds per piece on average, unless it's a much longer piece. The IH Journal pays. We pay 30 British pounds per submission that gets published. The other places, I don't believe so, because I don't recall getting anything from them. Humanizing language teaching, it is more about the community supporting itself. Much like today's teacher training day, the speakers at the training day, I hope they know, are not paid for their efforts today. We just really, really appreciate it from our hearts, but not from our wallets. So, yeah, there are paid outlets there, and it's quite amazing that there are, to be honest, because I don't imagine that there's much revenue being generated by a lot of these websites. So, for example, the IH Journal, there's no advertising on the page. So it's basically IH doing it to further the causes of English language teaching, which I think is admirable. So, from that, let's move on and consider some aspects of writing itself. And I'm going to go through this part relatively quickly because I think that the best way to learn how to structure an article is to look at examples of articles that have already been published, because by and large, they will fit this structure more or less, but they will have been good enough in terms of structure and writing to have been published in the first place. The example that I was going to show, but I think I'll just send a link to it, is a very nice article written by Rona Snelling about teaching and creating materials for lower level learners. This has a very nice structure, and I had to do very, very little with it in terms of editing. So when you write an article, obviously you need to open with some kind of introduction. then build the idea that's at the heart of your article so that the reader, as they're going through the article, knows why you're writing it and what they are reading about. Sometimes writers get a little bit lost along the way, either because they weren't completely sure of what they were writing at this time that they started, or because well, they never were sure. That happens. Um, that's more of a traditional essay in a way. The word essay itself is very interesting because it comes from the French and it basically means to try or to make an attempt. So if you look at some of the classic essays written by the likes of Montaigne, you'll find that it was an idea. Montaigne developed the idea, sometimes changed his mind about the idea as he was writing, and then kind of looped around and went in circles. He was such a good writer that nobody really minded, and it was very interesting to kind of see how he developed ideas. But when you're writing an article, make sure that you have the full idea in your head and you're able to build it convincingly. So that really, those two things come together very closely. And when you're writing an introduction, there are two ways to go about it. The introduction is either the thing that you start with that opens the door, or you write the article and finish by writing the introduction. So the introduction is basically you from the perspective of having written the article. To give you an example of the former, I don't know if anybody here is old enough to remember the film My Cousin Vinny. Does anyone know the film? It's Joe Pesci, Marissa Tomei. The Karate Kid was in there. Julia, thank you. Yes, it's not just me. So anyway, for some reason, I was thinking about My Cousin Vinny and how the two kids involved at the start get into trouble. And they got into trouble because they were saying things in front of the police that, if written down, made them look guilty. So I don't know if you remember the scene, but there's been a murder, and the kids are like, "We killed him? We killed him?" Something like that. And then in the court, they read out the transcript. "We have your confession here. We killed him. We killed him." And they're like, "No, that's not what we said." Well, it was what they said. It's not how they said it. And I'd been thinking about this for some time, and I thought, well, do you know what? That's a very interesting point about genres of production, that how we produce language has to fit the output in a way. So if you say something, it needs to be listened to. If you write something, it needs to be read. And you can't really write to be listened to in that sense. So that's where my article idea came from. And it was published by Modern English Teacher, and it starts with that little scene from My Cousin Vinny. So in that case, the introduction then led to the rest of the article. But other times, you want to wait until you've got the article in place before you even start thinking about your introduction. Once you've done that and you start building the idea, another thing that a lot of editors will really be looking for is actionable content. And what I mean by that is, instead of just writing something that people will be like, yeah, yeah, you're right, I agree. Instead of just writing that, make sure that teachers will be able to read your article and do something different in their lessons. So if it's a practical article, that sort of thing is very easy. You know, if it's just a matter of saying, hey, here are 5 activities to try, the actionable content is built in. And we do have a section in the IH Journal called Practical Matters. So those articles are actually very easy to write, provided you have those ideas already in mind and they're linked by some sort of theme. Otherwise, if you're writing a more kind of experiential thing, you need to think more carefully about what's actionable there. So I worked very closely with Stephen Farron, who is the DOS at, I think, IH Belfast, if memory serves. And he had a piece published in the most recent edition of the journal where he was talking about what his previous DOSes, the ones that he'd worked under, taught him about the nature of being the DOS. And I felt the first time I read it that it was really interesting but it wouldn't change anything about how I saw teaching or being a DOS. Or if it was going to change it, it wasn't remarkably clear. So we worked very closely together through the editing phase, and by the time it went live, there was a lot more of what you might call actionable content, and these were parts of the text where you'd be like, aha, I can see how I might change my teaching or DOSing practices because of this. And then finally, the conclusion. And like with Cambridge writing, I think conclusions only need to be very short. Most of the time, when you get to the end of an article, you know that you're at the end because the ideas have been developed. You've reached that point of fulfillment. The conclusion just wraps things up nicely and maybe points the direction for future writing or future thoughts on that topic. So there we go. That is a basic structure for your article. And that brings me to the final idea for today's workshop, which is idea generation time. I came up with some ideas for articles that I would like to read. And I'm going to share a couple of those with you. But I'd also like you to either share in the meeting or in the chat if there's anything that you'd like to write about, and we can kind of knock these ideas backwards and forwards for a few moments so that we can perhaps get an idea of some future articles for the IH Journal. I'm open to submissions right now, so if anybody has something in their heads that they would like to see out there in the world, that would be fantastic. So who would like to start? Has anyone got a thought that they'd like to share? Shifa, I see you've turned on the microphone. What would you like to say?
Hi, Chris. Thank you. That was a really interesting input session. I'm just curious. I confess I have not read the IH journal, but I'm based in Central Asia at the moment, and I'm just wondering, do you get any people coming to talk about ELT in Central Asia?
We've had a couple of writers submit from that area, but I wouldn't say that the writing that they produced was specific to the locality. And I'm always very happy to know more about teachers' experiences in different parts of the world. So, for example, one of the topics that I thought would be well worth exploring, because I haven't seen anything about it, would be some of the specifics of culture in different places that have an immediate kind of effect or consequence for teaching. So, for example, going right back to the beginning of my career as an EFL teacher, I was in Japan, and I remember that we had to specifically teach our students something about body language, because, like in normal, let's say, native speaker environments, if someone was to refer to themselves, they go, "Who? Me?" and they'd point to their sternum, their chest just here. Yeah. But in Japan, they'd be like, "Who? Me?" and point at the nose because the self was here. You'd point this way. So I thought if anyone knew enough about different kind of cultural specificities, that would be a really interesting article. Some things to bear in mind teaching students from X, and then go through, talk about the background of it, talk about the corrective that you might want to offer within your own teaching. So there's the actionable content. And then it would help prepare teachers who, for example, might be leaving my school at the end of the year, who are going to go to Korea, Japan, Central Asia, anywhere like that. And they would then go there with eyes open, ready to teach the students that they meet because of those sort of issues. Is there an article that you have in mind? Is there a topic that you like or that you're passionate about that you would want to share with the world?
Well, in terms of my experience here, they've got an interesting situation here where they're wanting to boost local teachers. So we have a situation where we have co-teaching. So you have, I'm regarded as an international teacher, and I work closely with a local teacher. So there's lots of, so what happens a lot is translanguaging, which is also very topical in ELT. So that's maybe something I would like to explore, Chris.
Yeah, we had something about translanguaging in gosh, was it this issue or the issue before? I'm trying to remember. But we did have something about that. I'm having a look through now. We've got Exploring the Role of the Multilingual Teacher by Helen Patio-Combe. That was in this re most recent issue. Before that, we did have something about translanguaging. But I don't recall ever having anything about co-teaching. And I think that if a teacher were to find themselves in a co-teaching environment without much guidance, they would really want to know from somebody who's experienced it and who has advice to share. Um, I don't recall ever doing co-teaching as such. So, kind of like how to get started with co-teaching, something like that, would be a fantastic sort of article for us because it's a problem. I don't know where I would turn for advice because I don't know anyone else who's really done co-teaching. So my first thought would be I want to go and read about it. So I should imagine
Yeah.
something like that would really fit the bill. Kat has, thank you, Shifa. Kat has posted, do you think it would be nice to compare Slovak learners learning English and Americans learning Slovak? Yeah, I think so. I think one thing here is that I love articles that take something specific. And you might think, hey, I don't teach Slovak students. I'm not going to be teaching Slovak students. So I'm not interested. But I like an article that can take something specific and offer a generalization based on it. So, for example, how did you learn about the differences between Slovak learners and other learners? What made it apparent? What signs were there? Who did you turn to for advice on how to deal with such situations? How did you go about learning more? How did you show sensitivity to the students? That's all stuff that any teacher would want to know about because they would face exactly the same thing when they move to a new country themselves. So I think, yes, I would be very, very interested in something like that. Any other ideas? We've still got how long have we got? 5 minutes. Ooh. I had this thought for the next issue of something along the lines of the future of ELT. Today we listened to Glenn talking about AI. I've talked about it a little bit in terms of generative AI and the ill effects that it might have on the writer. But what about ELT as an industry? I wonder if there will be much of a place for us to teach A1 or pre-A1 students moving forward, certainly with adults. I had an online Italian lesson this morning, just for a minute or two, and it was not with a real person. It was with an AI avatar in Duolingo. So I held the phone. It was a video call. It responded to me. My Italian is very, very basic, so there wasn't very much that I could communicate, but it gave me feedback. And at the end of this very quick conversational segment, there was a transcript of what we'd said and how I'd said it so that I could then reflect on my performance. And I feel that when you're starting out in a language, that's pretty much what you need. There's a lot there to get you started. But what does that mean for us as teachers? If the A1 demographic starts to dwindle because AI is taking the place of an expensive teacher, when you consider how cheap something like Duolingo is, what is the future? What does it bring for us? Estelle asks if it would be good to combine AI and EI, emotional intelligence. I did read something recently suggesting that emotional intelligence might be like this learning preferences thing in that it's not built on the most solid of foundations. Um, so I'm a little bit wary of terms like emotional intelligence, probably because people have complained that I lack it. So that could be a part of the issue for me. But if it was an interesting and well-written article, I would be very happy to take a look. Oh, and the interaction between them, absolutely. I don't think people are talking about that enough because I do know a lot of people are now using AI to give some kind of emotional guidance on things. And a lot, I think, depends on the quality of the prompt and the way that you ask the question. Some people berate AI for giving you nonsense. So, for example, if you ask AI, how many rocks should I eat each day? Some AIs will actually tell you. But it's a case of if you put in BS, you get BS out. I actually really, really like ChatGPT as a writer. I love writing, so I will never ask ChatGPT to generate anything for me. But the thing I lack the most is a good reader. I produce a lot of writing. I don't know anybody who would have the time or patience to read it except ChatGPT. So when I finish writing a story, I'll put it into a Word document, feed it into ChatGPT, and say, please take a look at my story. Does it have any literary merit? Does it hold together well? And it has given me really, really good feedback on it. Amazingly, in one moment, it was almost freaky actually. ChatGPT was nice enough to compare my story to the work of the writer Somerset Maugham, who some of you might have heard of. It said there's certainly a hint of Somerset Maugham about your story. And I love Maugham. I've got all of his books in hardback on the top shelf over there. And I didn't tell ChatGPT this. So I don't know if it's just figured out how to get into my head to win my affection, but it worked. So, I'll defend it a little bit. Um, when you say, would it not fail the zero GPT test, though? Well, if you write something and you're scared about sending it to the editor, tell ChatGPT that you've written this text and that you're going to submit it to, and then the name and the address of the journal, and ask it, do you think this fits what they publish? And it will give you feedback. Don't let it change things. It will ask you, would you like to work on this together? You say, no, no, that's fine. Thank you very much. Say thank you because it costs them more when you do. So you say thank you very much, but that's okay. Use the feedback that it gave you because it is good feedback generally, but then generate the edits yourself. Work through the text yourself because really, if you don't like writing, don't write. Leave it to other people. If you do like writing, do it as much as possible so that you can get better at it and send the work to me. I'm going to send you one last link in the chat, and it is to my own webpage. I have a kind of portfolio of writing there, and in this portfolio, you'll see links to a lot of the outlets that have published my work before. You can also then see some of the articles that I've written over the years. You might start thinking, oh gosh, if that's all it takes, I think I could do better. In which case, fantastic, send me your work. Always very happy to see people produce and send out what they've done. But otherwise, I think that is everything that I wanted to talk about for this session. So I want to thank you all very much for your time and attention.